This morning, we're going to be in 1 Samuel 16. If you have your Bibles and want to turn there, go ahead and do so. We are beginning a brand new series a couple weeks back on the life of King David. And so we're looking at the hand of God specifically in the complexities of his life. And I think that this is one of the things that we can identify with a lot around King David and this really, really complex person that we read about of really high highs and low lows, and here's successes, and here's some failures, and here's his faithfulness, and here's God's blessing, and then guess what? Here's the fruit and the fallout of a lot of his sin. And you read through his life, and it's this mountains and valleys kind of a up and down kind of a thing. And the question comes up is, where in the world is God's hand in the complexities of not only his life, but our lives as well? And that's what we're doing in the middle of this series. And so today, I'm calling today Purpose in the Pasture. And I think that's what you're going to see here in this text, purpose in the pasture, really taking a look at these seasons in our lives that are kind of in obscurity, that are in these unknown times, these things where you're sitting there going, okay, God, what is it that you're doing in this season of my life? Specifically, it's the 15 years from the time that David is anointed as king, which is where we were this past week, to the time that he actually sits on the throne. These 15 years of obscurity and 15 years of sitting there kind of going, okay, God, what in the world are you doing when all I can see is sheep around me and I should be sitting on a throne? And it's not to say that you've got a throne in your future or anything weird like that, like David literally did or anything, but it is to simply say that there's purpose in the pasture. There's purpose in the pasture. These seasons when you're sitting there going, okay, God, what in the world are you doing? I was reading an article a little while ago by Jeffrey Zachs. He was talking about the difficulty of living in a quick fix world today. And I think many of us sense this, we feel it, we know that everything is microwavable, everything is fast food, this, that, and the other. There's high efficiency everything, which I happen to love because of efficiency is my love language in a lot of ways. Like anybody else kind of like that, you're like, make it quicker, make it faster, make it better, and it's awesome. This is the world that we're living in today. Smartphones that are smarter than we are. AI bots that can do things in like 1 second that, people would take an entire week to work on. And this author, Jeffrey Zachs, he says all of it is great, and he's wrapping up this summary of things, and he says it's all great. We all like efficiency. We all like quicker. We all like smarter and faster and things like that. But the question he asks is, what do we do when we as a people, we as a culture, lose the ability to be patient? What if we've forgotten that virtue? And what if we get to a point where impatience is the new normal in which we live? I think we feel this. Like I mentioned, like efficiency is a love language, and it's one of these things that I'm sitting there going, yes, that gets me really, really excited. Not long ago, a few months back, I found myself flying over the Atlantic Ocean and getting frustrated at the internet because it was taking a little bit long to download my movie, which was like the sixth one I was watching on this flight. And it took like an extra 10 seconds for it to buffer and to be able to watch a movie flying over the middle of the ocean in the middle of nowhere. And I'm sitting there going, come on, y'all, like hurry up, right? Anybody else kind of like that? You get to an intersection, it's a red light, and you get up to the intersection and stuff, and you kind of hit your brakes, and then you're looking to the side, you're like, all right, it's almost going. And you let up a little bit, and you kind of inch forward, and you inch forward. Cat's always ripping on me about that one, and I love doing that. Or you get to the restaurant, and you place your order, and 30 seconds later, you're like, where's my food? Like, why are we waiting all day long for this thing? And you literally just put in an order. What happens when you stop appreciating the time and the testing and the difficulty that is absolutely necessary for you and I to be the men and women that God has called us to be? What happens when we stop believing that there's actually purpose here in this pasture season that I find myself in? And that's what I want to jump into in David's life in 1 Samuel 16. I want to pick it up kind of where we were last week. And if you're forgetting kind of where we are in the story, think back about 1,000 years before the time of Christ, before the reign of the kings. And all we're reading at this point in time is that in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. This is the landscape of the context for David's story at this point in time. All they knew was no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We know from the story that didn't typically work out very well. We keep reading the same description, that Israel kept doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. And you read the book of Judges and you're sitting there going, okay, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is horrific. I can't let my kids read this story or anything like that. And you're wondering, okay, where in the world is God? And God's sitting there going, they kept doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so they get to this point where they ask God essentially for a king. Hey, they say, hey, all of our neighbors have kings, all of our enemies have kings, why can't we have a king? They ask Samuel, who was the prophet leader at that point in time, will you give us a king? And it seems like a normal request a little bit, except for the fact that we know hidden inside their hearts, they've already rejected God as their king. And so God comes and he says, okay, I'll give you what you asked for. However, you need to know this. It's not going to work out as well as you think it will. What you think you want isn't what you actually want. And he describes in detail kind of how that's going to play out. He says, hey, here it is. Kings have this nasty habit of acting like kings, where they think that the entire kingdom is all about themselves. They think it's about the throne. They think it's about themselves. They think it's about all the things that they can acquire, all the honor that they can hoard. And kings have a nasty way of going quickly sideways. Nevertheless, I'll give you the thing that you asked for. He gives them King Saul, first king in Israel's history. He was the obvious choice. He was the one that people look to and people look up to, and they're like, hey, he's head and shoulders above the rest, meaning he's a lot taller than I am. And like he's the one that everybody's looking at and be like, yeah, I can be proud about that guy being my king and representing me and my people, my tribe, and all the different things. Like that's the one that I can take a lot of joy and pride in. And so King Saul begins. It starts off going well for a little bit of time until he begins doing what kings often do, looking around and being like, look at my kingdom. And he begins getting prideful and self-sufficient. And so the Lord tells Samuel it's time to find another king. And he says, I want you to go to Jesse's household, and I want you to choose from one of his sons, one of the sons that I'm going to point out to you. I'm going to bring to your attention. And so Samuel goes, and he meets with Jesse and his household, and the first son comes, Eliab, and he thinks to himself, surely this is the Lord's anointed. He's the firstborn. He's the obvious choice. He's the one that looks like a king, and all these other kinds of things. And God says, nope, not the guy. And you remember what he tells him. This is what we talked about last week. He looks at him, and he doesn't look at him, but he says to Samuel, he says, stop looking at the things that everyone else looks at. Stop thinking like everybody else in the world thinks, because people will look at the outside, but the Lord looks at what's happening in the heart. In other words, I could care less about how tall he is, how good looking he is, how much power he has, how much strength he has, what any of these, I could care less about his resume and things like that. What I want to know is what's happening in here. You show me a man, you show me a woman after my own heart, and that's someone I can do something with. And so he keeps going down the line. He starts going through the different brothers. The 7 brothers aren't there. He calls and he says, are there any other sons that you have? And Father Jesse's kind of like, oh yeah, there's another one that I forgot about. He's out in the pasture. Let's go ahead and bring him in. And so we read in verse 13, Samuel says, rise and anoint him. Speaking of David, this is the one. And so Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Now, my question to you is, if you were to get this news and you were to be 14, 15-year-old David, now newly anointed king of Israel, not immediately, but hey, one day you're going to assume the throne, how would you take that news and what would you do next? Where would you go with that? I mean, I know I'll post about what we ate for dinner last week online or something like that. And so you better believe we'll probably post about it online, tell my friends, hey, there's probably a party. You won't believe what happened in my week. Guess what? Guess who's going to be king? Right? It's like, yeah, we're playing at my house this week. We're doing my games and things. You can imagine that this is kind of some of the things that you may want to do. Nevertheless, it's not what we see from King David or David at this point in time. We read in verse 19 that this is immediately after, and we don't get all the details of what's taking place. We find a very tormented King Saul because the blessing of God has been removed from his life. He's tormented in his soul, and they're looking for someone to come and to sing and play songs for him so that he can have a little peace in his life. And it says that they send messengers to Jesse and say, send me your son David. They hadn't met yet, but David had a reputation. And he says, send me your son David in verse 19. And I want you to notice where David is, who is out there with the sheep. Years later, after the anointing, we don't know exactly how much time has passed. You're the next king of Israel, and where do we find David? Not out at king's school, not out recruiting an entourage, not building his army, not building his platform, just out there in the pasture doing the exact same thing that he's always done. And so I love the way that Chuck Swindoll talks about this, but he talks about 3 words that describe what David's life was like out there in the pasture. He says the first word is obscurity, because when you're out there in the pasture, no one knows your name, no one knows what you're doing, no one cares anything about who you actually are. You're completely obscure. And no one's talking about you in the workplace, in the city, or anything like that. Excuse me. He says it's complete obscurity. No one cares. It's not the job that you grew up hoping to have at one point in time. He says the second word that describes the time in the pasture is monotony. In other words, you're going out there and you're just doing the same thing every single day. Over and over and over and over, boring same things all day long. You can get the picture of like David maybe coming home from work one day and mom's there and she's like, hey, how was your day, son? How did it go? What'd you do today? And he's like, oh, it was great. What'd you do? Well, like I watched the sheep. Like I literally just stared at them all day long. And she's like, great, that's wonderful. Like anything, any highlights, anything? He's like, well, they walked in circles and they didn't die. That was a win. And I picked up the slingshot. I picked up the slingshot and I started practicing it in the field. It got pretty good. I can hit a target from like 100 yards away. Throw this ball over those mountains over there real quick. And I started playing the harp a little bit. Same thing every day. Not very good, but I'm going to keep going at it. May write an album one day, thinking about calling it the Psalms. And he goes, the third word that describes that time in the pasture is reality, because the reality of what was actually taking place in the middle of all of that obscurity and in the middle of all of that monotony was that God was shaping his heart and making sure that he would be a different kind of a king. And here's David freshly anointed, not building his platform, not getting the army, not building his entourage or any of these things, going off to King's school, simply going back to the pasture, doing the exact same thing that he's always done. And this is how it typically goes, because we said before that many, many times that great seasons of revelation are often followed by seasons of preparation, seasons of pasture. When you're acknowledging and recognizing that it's not typically the case that you're immediately ready for the fullness of your calling. In other words, he's anointed as king. He's not ready to be king. There's shaping that needs to be done. There's maturing that needs to be done. There's waiting that needs to be done. There's a heart that needs to be shaped so that he actually is a king that's after my own heart, is how he would be described a little bit later on. Seasons of revelation are often quickly followed by seasons of preparation. It's why we read things like about Abraham and Sarah had to wait 25 years from the time of God's promise to the birth of Isaac, their son. We read about Moses and how they had a time of wandering in the wilderness twice, both before and after the burning bush experience. Hannah had to wait years and years and years before the birth of Samuel, her son. Ruth had to walk with Naomi for years as a widow before God would continue his line through her. Paul spent 3 years being discipled before he began his public ministry. Even Jesus had 40 days in the wilderness right before his public ministry, and it wasn't because he wasn't ready for it or anything like that. It's simply because there's purpose in the pasture. Never forget a buddy of mine's ordination ceremony a long time ago. We went to seminary together. In fact, we actually went to A&M together. We were friends for a long time, coming right out of the high school days. We were both at A&M and DTS at the same time. We graduated right around the same time. Coming out of graduation at DTS, he's sitting there going, you know what? I don't know that the Bible church is really my world. I think that it's the Anglican church. And he's like, problem is you go Anglican after DTS, none of what you did at DTS matters anymore. You got to redo seminary, you got to redo training, and you got to start all over again. Nevertheless, he's sitting there kind of going, okay, I think that the Lord is calling me to the Anglican church. And so he goes off and he restarts seminary all over again, goes through training, and a number of years back, we came back and saw his ordination ceremony. I don't know if you've ever been to an Anglican priest ordination ceremony. I'll just tell you, I think it was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen. And I loved a lot of the traditions and what they went through there. And there's a point in this ceremony, they do a lot of oral exams and things like that in front of witnesses and people that come to support you. And the priests are asking all these questions. But you get to this point in the ceremony where he lays down on the ground and his arms are spread out and his feet are completely spread out. And his forehead is against the ground. And he just has to sit there in silence and quietness. in recognition of saying, hey, this is the posture that I'm going to take for the rest of my days as I serve the Lord. And it's one of the more beautiful things to see. We don't practice that around here a whole lot. And I remember talking with them afterwards. We were catching up a long time after that, and I was like, tell me about the ministry, man. Like, what was happening right before ordination? And you kind of did these things. What's the ministry been like for you? I know you've been working at this church, and we were catching up, and he's like, you want to know what the past year's been like for me? All I've been allowed to do is to scrub toilets and mow grass. That's what my last year's looked like. And I'm like, no teaching, no leading groups, no leading ministries, nothing like that. He's like, no, I've been scrubbing toilets and I've been mowing grass. And he goes, it's been one of the most fruitful and life-giving years of my life. What God has done in my soul and what he's been teaching me while scrubbing toilets and mowing grass is like nothing I was ever able to learn in a classroom, nothing I was ever able to learn from a leadership position or anything like that. He goes, what God has been doing in my life is one of the most beautiful things. I'm so grateful for this past season when all I've been allowed to do is scrub toilets and mow grass. And sometimes I wonder if we come to a point where we despise the pasture. Have you ever come to a point where you despise the toilets and you despise the grass? Like, we all have that. Like, who's above that? We all have the toilet to scrub and we all have the grass to mow. And I wonder if we come to the point where we sit there and say, okay, God, do you know who I am? Like, do you know what I've done? Do you know my resume? Do you know the gifts and talents that I have? What in the world am I doing right here? Scrubbing the toilets, mowing the grass, watching the sheep do the same thing sheep do every single day. Do we despise the pasture? What he's saying right here is that there's purpose in the obscurity. There's purpose in all of the obscurity. It helps produce a lasting humility. In other words, all of that time in the pasture, nobody knows what you're doing. Nobody knows your name. Nobody sees it. Nobody's giving you trophies. There's no accolades or any of these things. What he's doing is making sure that that humility that was there at the very beginning is actually going to last when he brings you to a point, if he brings you to the point of accolades and praise or whatever it may be. Is that humility going to last? It's not just a humility at the very beginning, but it's one that's going to be sustained through the throne and the different things that he still has in his future. And so it's not shocking in the next chapter that you see this very mature David, and he's sitting there quickly deferring and giving glory to God. We see it in chapter 16. We're going to talk a little bit about Goliath next week in that famous story right there, but he's having this conversation with King Saul. It's a fascinating conversation that David's having with King Saul. And Saul's looking at David going, why in the world do you want to fight Goliath? He's like, you're a little boy. Why are you volunteering to fight this mighty Goliath who's like threatened all of our armies? There's not one military man that wants to fight him back. Why in the world do you want to do that? Like, this guy has been slaying soldiers since since he was a toddler. And you remember what David says back to Saul? He looks at him and he says, don't worry about it, my king, for your servant's been keeping his father's sheep. In other words, like, don't worry, I'm a shepherd. You're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? But he goes this, he says, don't worry because your servant's been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair. I struck it and I killed it. And so your servant's killed both a lion and a bear. Like, have you ever done that before? That's incredible. I promise you this is like if I ever manhandled a lion or a bear, you'd probably see it on a t-shirt or something, and you'd hear that sermon illustration every single week, right? And it's just not the way that David goes. And you read in the very next verse, he says, it's not all that, but he says, it was the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion. And it's the Lord who's going to rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. In other words, it wasn't my awesomeness that killed that lion. It wasn't my ability as a warrior that killed the bear. It was the mighty hand of God that came upon my life. And he's sitting there, God, and going, it's not about me. You want to know why I could take on Goliath? It's not about me. It's about the God whose hand is upon me. And it had nothing to do with me. All praise, all glory, and honor rightfully back to him. Psalm 28, he's going to say, praise be to the Lord, for he has heard my cry for mercy. In other words, all praise and glory goes back to him. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me. It's not about what I've done to become the king. It's not about my resume. It's not about my strength. It's not about my ability to do a slingshot. It's not about any of these other things. It's about the God whose hand comes and provides and does the things that I cannot do for myself. And so it begins in this humility of calling, sitting there kind of going, hey, last of the brothers, least obvious choice to be king. It begins with this humility, God looking at 14, 15-year-old David saying, hey, there's something that's there in his heart that I can do something with. But then that humility gets nurtured in all of the obscurity of the pasture, where no one's shouting his name. No one's saying thank you. No one's saying, hey, David, here's how awesome you are. No one's giving him trophies. No one's giving him accolades, raises, or recognition at all. It's simply him in a field going, no one else can see me or see the things that I do, but you do, God, and that's who I'm serving here this day. The heart of a king who knows he's not actually the king. The heart of a leader who's sitting there going, it's just not about me. There's a story of Adrian Rogers. He's a pastor and was not at this conference. It's a very famous story among pastor circles and stuff, but they're at this pastor's conference. Adrian Rogers is the speaker that day. He has everybody in this packed out crowd stand to their feet, and he's like, everybody's standing up there right now, and he goes, if you've ever made homecoming court when you were in high school, I want you to stay standing and everybody else take a seat. He goes, if you were in the top 10 in your class, stay standing. If you got a scholarship when you went to college, I want you to stay standing. If you made the honors list, I want you to stay standing. Top 10, all the dean's list, master's degree, and all these different kinds of things. He goes down this long list. After a little while, there's only a few group of people that are standing left, and he goes, this is absolutely incredible. He's like, I want everybody to look because this is absolutely incredible, the things that you've accomplished and the things that you've done. And I want everybody to give him a round of applause. They start cheering and applauding like, this is incredible. This is the who's who of the world, right? And of course, now he goes Jesus juke on you and everything. And he goes, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news for you while you keep standing. He goes, the good news is God can still use you mightily in his kingdom. The problem is you're not the obvious choice. Because when God's looking for people to use, he's looking for the humble, the broken in spirit, the contrite in heart, the often overlooked, the weak, maybe even the despised, the wandering about in obscurity, wondering if anyone will ever know or see the things that I'm doing, men and women who can easily lower themselves and give all praise and glory rightly back to him. It's Ruth, a young Moabite woman who clings to her mother-in-law's faith until the time that God comes and it chooses to continue the messianic line through her. It's Moses, a homeless orphan who is estranged from his adopted family that God sees fit to call out of the wilderness and use to bring his people into freedom. It's Abram and Sarah, barren parents of a new nation. And the list goes on and on and on, but I want you to think about what this means for you. Moms, what did you do on Friday? Change diapers? Make meals, breakfast, pack lunches? Do clothes, do laundry? Like anyone say thank you? No. Anyone honor you, call you blessed? No. Right? Did the husband come in and be like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely glorious. I am so blessed to be married to you and all the things that you've done today. Did anyone rise up and call you blessed? Why'd you do it? Because I love my family. Why'd you do it? Because everything I do is for the praise and for the glory of his name. Young mom wrote in a CT magazine, Christianity Today magazine, wondering out loud if anything that I do during the day is seen by God, if any of it really matters, because it seems to me like the kids don't see that it matters. The husband doesn't really see that it matters. She's wondering about it out loud. And another veteran mom writes back into the magazine and writes this. She says, it took me a long time to believe it, but the mundane duties are like God's heavenly sandpaper. I love that. The mundane duties are like God's heavenly sandpaper. They can mold character. They can cleanse away impurity. They can transfigure a person to reflect the beauty of Jesus Christ. Where we labor is where our character is formed and we are made Christ-like. Much of our work, especially the more menial tasks, teaches us to repent and to die daily to our sins. Our highest vocation is not the kind of work that we do, but the kind of people that we become in the doing it. And that is the challenge that's before us here today. Father, all of this obscurity is yours. I know that there is purpose in the middle of this thing, and no one's seeing it at home. No one's seeing it around me. No one's seeing it on my street. My boss is not recognizing this in the workplace, whatever it may be. But all of this season of obscurity that I find myself in, God, it is all for you. And I know that there's purpose in the middle of this thing to sit there and to say, I know I'm in the middle of a dead-end job. I don't know my 5-year plan. I don't know my 10-year plan. I don't know what's 20 years down the line or anything like that. But I know, Father, that my pasture time is yours. Like I know that the obscurity, God, you move in power in the middle of these things. I may be checking the job boards every single day for brand new opportunities, but God, this season of pasture and all of the obscurity, God, it is completely yours. I'm sitting at school and I have no idea why I'm studying calculus or some of these things that I'm studying here today, but to say, God, all of my time, all of my wondering, all of these obscure times when, guess what, I don't know what the future holds, Father, it is all yours. I'm not in a relationship anymore because my husband or my wife left. And it's that season of, what in the world am I doing? And I don't know what the future holds. And I'm used to being in a relationship. I've never been alone at this point in time. And I don't know how to do any of this, but Father, it's all yours. All of this time in the pasture, the obscurity, no one's seeing me or recognizing me or paying attention in the middle of this time, Father, it is all yours. One of the more beautiful stories I heard recently was from a friend who was recently left by her husband. And she was grieving it for a really, really long time. And she says, Aaron, I thought I'd be desperate for another man. I thought that I would be needy. I've never been without another person in my life. But God has proven that he is more than enough in my life. His sufficiency has delighted me every single day. And this time alone has been exactly what I needed for him to take hold of all of me. Church, all I'm saying is that there is purpose in the pasture, that God is moving in the pasture. He is working in the middle of the obscurity. He's living and working in the middle of the monotony of the day-to-day because that's where faithfulness gets formed. We know this. This is where faithfulness gets formed. It's not unpurposeful. Like God is doing something in the monotony and the daily rhythms and the routines and the coming back and doing the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, here's David going back to the pasture. The sheep are just walking and all they're doing is eating grass all day long. And he's sitting there going, what in the world do I do with my time? I know, I'll pick up a slingshot and I'll start playing with it a little bit. And we'll see if I get any good. And years later, what happens? God uses that skill to slay the mighty Goliath. The monotony is not useless. He's working in the middle of it. He's sitting there kind of going, what else do I do with my time? I'm going to play this harp. I'm going to play some songs. I'm going to write some poems. I'm going to write them down in a book. I may call it Psalms. And here we are still singing these Psalms thousands of years later, all for the praise and for the glory of his name. Like, think about the monotony of his day. He's out there watching the sheep every single day. And in Psalm 78, we're going to read of King David that it says of him that with upright heart, David then shepherded the people and guided them with a skillful hand. In other words, he thought he was simply going and just doing this task, this remedial task of watching the sheep, and God was doing something in him that would make him a great shepherd of people, not just the sheep. God was shaping him and doing something brand new in him to where it wouldn't just be about a herd and some animals over here. It would be about a mighty kingdom, that he would be able to do something that he never thought was possible. He could not even see in the middle of that moment. And it was all shaped in the pasture, in the monotony of life. He keeps walking by faith and keeps trusting God and keeps practicing the things he's supposed to practice. He keeps singing the songs that were in his soul to the point that all of those faith muscles just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. So the faith that he had in the beginning did not end when he was 14 or 15 years old, but he got to the end of his time and he was called a man after God's own heart, faithful in all of his ways. Church, we know that this is what happens. Faithfulness in the monotony, it builds up our faith. It builds up, it continues to grow and get stronger. Nobody thinks that David was this accomplished musician when he was 13, 14 years old. He began a certain way, he kept practicing it, and it kept getting better and better and better. I mean, you read some of the early Psalms, and I kind of laugh a little bit at it. Psalm 47:6, sing praises to God, sing praises, is what he says. Sing praises to our King, sing praises. Like, it's not the greatest song in the world, right? Like, it kind of sounds like the rookie worship leader that's kind of yelling at you, like, sing a little bit louder now. And it's just like, maybe this is bad exegesis right there at all, but you're kind of looking at it going, okay. Like, he's just writing it early on, and then you get to Psalm 95. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving, and let us shout joyfully to him with our psalms. Psalm 96, so sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord and bless his name and tell of his salvation from day to day. But that's what faithfulness does. It strengthens those muscles to the point that songwriters become worshipers of the almighty living God. To the point that the shepherds of sheep become shepherds of men and shepherds of women. To the point that humble beginnings become lasting godly legacies. To the point that slingshots become giant killers, and character turns into integrity, and boys become men, and young girls become women, and students become wise and mature well beyond their years. Never forget one of my favorite Kobe Bryant interviews. Loved watching his game and hearing a lot of his stories that were right around his funeral time, but people were telling stories left and right. One of my favorite ones came in one of these interviews he did towards the end of his career, one of the last championships that he had, but it was the final game, and they had a big come from behind victory. And in the middle of this interview, the guy kind of looks at him and says, okay, Kobe, when did you know that this game was won? When did you know that this game was won? And he looks at him and he goes, it was actually last summer. That was the time that the entire team came together in an old gym, and you wouldn't believe the amount of bonding, the amount of hard work, and everything that went into the summer. And he just goes on and he starts describing the competition that was taking place in that old gym in the middle of nowhere. And he's sitting there kind of going, that's when I knew that that game was won. It wasn't today. It was when we were all back there in the pasture, in the obscurity, in the monotony of the day-to-day, going after it over and over and over and over again. And your thing may not be the NBA or anything like that, but you remember what it was like that first day that you were at work. Maybe you were a teacher, you were a nurse or a doctor or whatever your thing may be, and you remember what it was like to walk in on that first day and to sit there and go like, God, I've got no idea what I am doing here. And you just keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. And in the monotony, you see faithfulness being built up, and you see God building something in you that is beautiful and mature, and he starts using it in incredible ways. I told you before about some of my early rookie ministry stories. I look back at those things and laugh all the time. First communion that I ever did was a fast food communion. Did I ever tell you guys that story? Fast food communion was a true story. One of the first times I ever got to preach, it was a communion service, and we came up there, and it wasn't here, it was back at Northwest Bible Church. I remember coming up there, and like I often do, I lose track of time and stuff, and yeah, it was bad at the very beginning. And I get done preaching and everything. We had 3 services happening. I try to transition to the communion service, and the worship leader walks down and stuff, and actually Caleb Jones's father, Travis, you guys remember Travis, he walks down in the middle of the worship service, and he's like, actually, guys, we're out of time. Y'all are going to need to walk in and grab the elements at the back door. You can take the communion kind of out in the parking lot on your way out. And I was like, oh my gosh. Fast food communion the first time that you ever did. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? First time I ever did a baptism, I gave the kid a concussion. I was like, I don't know about the concussion part, but like literally it was kind of just like this setup right there. We had a gold cross, not real gold, but it's kind of a metallic cross. I'm back there. I didn't know you took the kid long ways and you lean him back long ways and stuff like that. I took him back the short way, lean him straight back, and his head goes boom. I lean him back, and I was like, oh my gosh. It radiated, like the whole church could just hear the crashing of this kid's head against the cross. Are you kidding me? And I'm looking down, I'm going, oh my God, is there blood? I'm going, oh Lord, don't let there be blood. I was like, he comes back up, I'm like, are you okay, buddy? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And the next kid comes, I still don't get it, and I'm like, he's going down there, and I'm like kicking his legs underneath the water. I'm like, go down, you know, and it's like the first time that there's a baptism. Like, I'm pretty sure like Warren Truesdale still keeps a record, like all the like bad slides and different things and stuff we did. I tried one time in a sermon to say of heart. Definitely said a fart in the middle of a sermon. And you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. And it's in the monotony that faithfulness is found. And it's in the faithfulness that maturity happens. And growth happens. And you keep opening it up, and you keep praying, and you keep going, and you keep learning the trade, and you keep going and walking and taking care of the sheep in the middle of the pasture. 15 years, David's in the pasture doing the exact same thing over and over and over again. And you never see him whine, you never see him complain. It's amazing. You never see him crying out to God, when is it my time? I thought you gave this anointing to me. You never see him go after Saul. In fact, it's the exact opposite of what happens. Saul goes after him, but like David keeps loving him, serving him, being faithful, sitting there kind of going, hey, whenever it's my time, it's my time. He's not entitled to anything, sitting there going, hey, do you know who I am? I'm the next anointed over here. All right, Lord, what in the world is happening in my life? Never complains. And we can look back on it today and we can sit there and say, okay, I can see the hand of God all over the place. I can see the purpose in the pasture 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. David didn't have that perspective at that point in time. He didn't know when it was going to end. He didn't know the time frame of the whole thing. But I think the key to his success was that he was able to think of the pasture as his purpose. And I think this makes all the difference in the world for him. To sit there and to say, okay, I know that throne, that timing may be there in the future. It was unique to David at that point in time, but to sit there and to say, no matter what, wherever I may be, this pasture right now, this is my purpose. Until you've called me onto something different, God, this is the thing that you've called me to do. I'm not looking at it as a training ground to something else. I'm looking at this as the thing, God, that you have called me to do. And so God's like, I want you to go watch sheep. And he's like, I'm in. I'll go and watch the sheep. I want you to sit there day after day. I'll sit there day after day. David, I want you to lead them beside still waters. Take them to greener pastures. I want you to protect them from lions and bears. I'm in. One of them goes missing. I want you to leave all of the others, and I want you to go find that one missing sheep. I want you to know them by name so that they also know the sound of your voice, because everything you do is a reflection of me. And it's not just David when he's out there being a shepherd, it's all of us. Everything that we do is a reflection of him. And it's like David gets that as he's writing the 23rd Psalm. You can almost see this and kind of to see this. Maybe it's kind of an aha moment one day when he's out there shepherding the sheep, the obscurity, the monotony of the pasture field. He's sitting out there kind of going, oh my gosh, the Lord is my shepherd. Everything I'm doing is simply a reflection of him. He's the one who provides for me. He's the one who leads me to still waters. He's the one who leads me to greener pastures. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Why? Because he's with me. He's with me. Because everything that I do is a reflection of him. And Jesus even says as much. John chapter 10, he's going to say, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He's like, I am that one that David's talking about in Psalm 23. In verse 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep know the sound of my voice. Verse 17, he says, I'm going to lay down my life only to take it up again, because I've been given the authority to lay it all down and to take it up again by my Father. And so where do you find Jesus? Right before the cross. You see him in the Garden of Gethsemane on the night of his betrayal, right before he moves to the cross, pleading with the Father about his own pasture sort of thing that he finds himself in at that point in time, saying, Father, if there's any other way to do this, let's do this. Yet, what does he say? Not my will, but your will be done. Because he knows that this pasture, it is his purpose. These people, they're the purpose. This task, this cross, it's the purpose. These diapers, these kids, this boss, this new season of my life that I find myself in, it is the purpose. And I wonder if that's the shift that we need to be making here today. To know that, hey, there is purpose in my pasture. There's purpose in the obscurity. There's purpose in the monotony of the day-to-day. God's moving in the middle of these things always. He's shaping you. He's refining you. He's doing things in you that you cannot see yourself. And one day, still future you may be able to see that a little bit better. But until then, to simply know that, hey, this pasture that I find myself in today, it is my purpose. Someone came and talked with me after the first service just a little bit ago and said, I never thought that this season late in my life when I'm dealing with sickness, illness, this difficulty, this surgery, this thing over here that I won't share their whole story and stuff. He's like, I never saw it as that. But to know that that is my purpose and to say, okay, God, whatever the pasture may be, I'm in it. It's yours. You want me to scrub toilets? I'm in. I'll be the best toilet scrubber you've ever seen. You want me to mow some grass? I'm going to do it like those golf, I'm going to do it like the lines and stuff, perfectly straight. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm in. That's my pasture. God, I'm in. I'm not looking 15, 20 years down the road, but God, this thing you've given me right here, I'm in. These kids, this husband, this wife, this school experience, this wandering time when I don't have clarity about what things may look like or the timing of God's hand in the middle of any of it, God, I'm in. All of this pasture is yours. Love the way that Jill Briscoe talks about this. I think she says it the best. Jill, traveling missionary along with her husband, Stuart, evangelist. And she says, people always ask, they're like, how do you do this? How do you go from place to place to place and move around so much? And she said it like this, and I love it. She says, you go where you're sent, and you stay where you're put. And you give what you've got until you're done. Not looking at 30 years down the road. Not looking at 50 years down the road with specificity. Right here. This pasture, this field, these sheep, these opportunities, this people, this job, this family, this spouse, this stage in my life in health or in weakness. It's all for your purposes. It's all for your glory. May we be a church that knows the purpose in the pasture. May we see our pastures as the purpose he's put us in today. And so, Jesus, we love you. God, we do praise you and we say thank you, Father, for giving us your Son. You didn't say no to the pasture that was before you. You didn't wander through it, God. You gladly took on flesh. You condescended from heaven. You came to us. You suffered, you bled, and you died as a substitute for us because we were your pasture, we were your purpose. That any and all who would come to you in genuine faith may find life in you now and for all of eternity. God, we praise you, we worship you. Father, I want to pray for the brother or sister today that's come in and they are in the middle of that pasture. They're wondering, why in the world am I just looking at sheep? Why in the world am I doing the same boring thing day after day after day? God, are you even in this? And I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would give them a resounding yes today, that they would see your mighty hand in the middle of it all, producing a profound, lasting humility in the obscurity of faithfulness and all the monotony. God, that you would make us men and women not just faithful walking with you at 14, but all the way until the very end. That you would be praised, that you would be glorified in all things, oh God, all things. So church, I just want to give you a few moments of just quiet by yourself. Maybe you need to just bring to mind the specifics of the pasture maybe you're in right now. Would you offer it over to the Lord? Would you seek his hand in the obscurity, monotony? You would see the reality of what he is doing in this season, that you would be filled with faith. That you would offer it over to him and say, God, come and be the Lord of my pasture seasons. A few moments we'll come together. We'll sing again in just a few.